Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Community Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Sarah Reiling, one of the worship associates, and part of the team that works to bring the worship services to you each week. We welcome to our pulpit today Dr. Kendra Weddle. Dr. Weddle has a PhD in religious studies and was a professor of religion for over 20 years. She recently decided to shift her focus from university context to faith communities. As such, she currently serves as a scholar in residence at North Haven Church in Dallas and has discovered that she enjoys preaching. She has become a frequent guest speaker at All People's Church UU in Fort Worth, in addition to preaching and writing liturgy at North Haven Church. Please welcome Kendra Weddle.
Thank you, Sarah. It's wonderful to be back with you today. So our second story for today comes from the Muslim tradition, and it's a Sufi story. Once upon a time, a seeker came to one of the great teachers to ask for help with their problems and guidance on their path, to learn more teachings. To everyone's surprise, the teacher simply told the seeker to abandon their spiritual studies and leave his presence at once. A kind-hearted visitor who saw this encounter began to question the teacher. "Why would you do such a thing?" he asked. "The seeker was asking for help and you denied him. They are unsure of their future and you did not listen and did not help." The teacher responded with a smile. "You shall have a demonstration of the teaching," the teacher said. And just at that moment, a bird flew into the room, darting here and there, not knowing where to go in order to escape. The Sufi waited until the bird settled near the open window, and then suddenly clapped his hands. Alarmed, the bird flew straight through the opening of the window to freedom. The teacher looked at the well-meaning questioner. To those who question, the sound of that answer must be quite a shock, even an affront. Would you agree? And then he bowed. An interesting story and hard to know what to do with. So maybe we'll give it a shot. I want to tell you that I am a D- yogi. Even though I have been practicing on and off for well over 10 years, you would probably never know if you watched one of my classes. Take, for example, a recent one. I like it because the lights are kept low so that you can barely see yourself in the mirror, which I think makes the class infinitely more exciting. And there are candles sprinkled all around and reflecting off the mirrors, and so that's a perfect distraction from all the breathing and squeezing and holding in and letting go. So there I am, and every muscle is tight, every tendon, every ligament is stiff to the point of snapping rather than stretching. And our teacher says to move gently and with strength into a seated position where both legs are bent in an L shape. And then she's instructing us to add a twist, and that will squeeze out the toxins in our spine, she says. Well, and I think, well, they might, but I can't feel any of it because while you're wanting me to twist, I can barely sit here with my legs as they are screaming at me. You get the picture. But there is something that I'm learning from my time practicing yoga, and that is that balance is the key. We mirror poses on each side of the body. We use breathing exercises that use one nostril at a time. We train our attention to notice and to seek to keep our arms and legs and hands and feet, everything cooperating together. Balance is the goal. But I think balance is also one of the most difficult things to achieve for any of us. I once heard the religion scholar Joseph Campbell talk about how often we want to put ourselves in one of two sides. The side of the good, of course, as opposed to the side of the bad. But the wisdom traditions encourage us instead to strive for the tension in the middle. The power of aligning ourselves on opposing teams, however, kind of feels a lot more natural. In fact, our entire political structure, for example, seems that it's being exploited so that we are focused on standing against each other, against those on the wrong side. And the stakes feel intense, don't they? And yet I want to make the distinction between participating in our civic responsibilities in meaningful ways that include voting and grassroots organizing and giving time and money and working on behalf of greater justice and liberation for all people, and distinguish that from viewing the entire prospect in dualistic terms. Us versus them. Balance, that is, putting ourselves in the middle, refusing to accept either or, and instead striving for both and, requires us to hold this intention. In yoga, it's pulling and pushing simultaneously. Reaching one arm up and pushing down with the other. Planting one's feet firmly on the mat while also reaching your arms toward the ceiling. Pulling without pushing, or pushing without pulling, results in falling out of your pose, strengthening only one side of your body, getting an uneven stretch. The secret, which actually is no secret, is to think about the opposing forces and keep them in your mind at the same time. Now, the problem of losing our balance and succumbing to this dualism is that it accepts the premise of separation and cultivates the experience of life as conflict and competition, so that we come to see ourselves as separate, unaffected by others' actions and intentions. We begin to view life through a narrow, individualized lens, and therefore do not give the attention we need to the lives of others. The Buddhist teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, has coined a term that I think is kind of helpful here for our understanding of just how interconnected we are. Interbeing, he said, is the true reality of our existence. And he once used a meditation on a sheet of paper as a way to explain what he meant by interbeing. Imagine all of the elements that make up a piece of paper: soil, water, sunshine, glue, dye, chemicals, seed of a tree, roots, people who run the machines, where they come from, their thoughts, their feelings, their ancestors. You get the picture, right? So once he invited people to think deeply about all of these aspects that go into a single sheet of paper, and then he lit it on fire. And they watched as the flame consumed the paper. And then he asked, where's the paper now? Where is the sunlight, the seed, the rain, the people who made it? Where is the smoke from the flame? Where is the tree? And I think this thought experiment is really quite profound, and it applies, of course, not just to paper, but to all reality. So, in our story for today, we learn about someone who is a seeker, someone who is on the path of curiosity, who wants to be more in tune with life, to understand all of the questions that life poses to us, presumably to gain more happiness, joy, maybe contentment. And this person must have traveled a great distance, far enough on the path of religion to trust that there would be someone with more experience, more training, more years on the quest who might know and would have some useful answers. And this strikes me as an illustration of desiring balance, but so far not being able to develop all of the muscles necessary to achieve it. You know this. Religion is really just a toolbox filled with tools that help us make sense of who we are, why we're here, what life is trying to teach us. And yet it is possible, I think, to get all of those tools out of the toolbox and to use them appropriately and well, and still not achieve all that we hope. And I kind of think this is where the story invites us. And maybe it's a place where we all find ourselves at some point in time or another. We've employed these tools, and some have been helpful for a season, and maybe we feel like they haven't quite completed the job. We aren't sure what other tools we might need, but it feels like we didn't get the entire set. Do you feel that way? I sometimes feel that way. Where are all the missing tools? And in our story, I think this wise teacher realizes the problem. It isn't that for the seeker, the seeker hasn't sought well or rightly. The teacher seems to realize that more of the same is not going to solve the problem. Something altogether different is needed. Now, I know there are many who would like us to believe that there's only one true path. But since we are gathered here together this morning as part of a UU congregation, I know that you are wiser than that. And when I taught courses on world religions to undergraduate students, we worked on some concepts that I thought were especially helpful. Maybe I thought they were more helpful than the students, I'm not sure. But we started with the idea of diversity, which simply just means that we can recognize the vast ways in which we are unique and different. We are a panoply of wonderful ways to make us uniquely ourselves. And then we moved on to talk about tolerance. And tolerance is a term that has been used to suggest that we make peace with our differences by acknowledging them, sure. But yet I wanted my students to go beyond just recognizing differences and diversity. I want to go beyond tolerance, which is kind of just putting up with that. I want us to have more respect than that requires. And what I really wanted my students to grasp was the idea of pluralism, which is that genuine seeking understanding. And it requires more than just putting up with diversity. It means taking a committed interest in people and in their differences. But more than that, it's a commitment to learn, to be shaped by people whose perspectives are different from my own. Pluralism means that I become a better practitioner of my faith because of what I learn from you. Now, in the all too common competitiveness around whose religion is right, I think a key element is lost. And that is that we need each other, including the ways in which we all make sense of life and of faith. Now, last week, your minister, the Reverend Dr. Aya Duom, talked about how we need to take seriously the shared responsibilities of our faith communities. And she used the geese flying in formation as a way to help us think about that, working together. And I think this image is true, not just of getting things done, but also of enabling us to live better lives, more meaningful lives. And I think the sage in the story for today knew this truth too. The bird had landed in the room, presumably not where it wanted to be. And after taking in its surroundings, the bird perched near the window, unsure where to go. But then, with that sudden sound, the clap of a hand, the bird knew the way of freedom and liberation. It didn't have to think about it, just needed to follow its natural reflex. But that was in response to someone else's actions. So I think we too come to a place where we can go no further. Maybe we have stagnated in a job or a relationship, or maybe we feel burned out with no hope of respite in sight. Perhaps we've been hurt, and those raw places keep feeling more raw and don't seem to be healing. Or maybe we have become bored and maybe uninterested in life. The marrow seems to have dried up. The possibilities of feeling at the end of our road are endless. But like the bird, all we need is to find the open window. So I'd like to suggest that it is altogether possible that this window is the wisdom of pluralism. Pick up a memoir by someone whose faith tradition you haven't explored. Learn about their life. Enter into a dialogue with them to see what they can teach you. And if you happen to need a suggestion, let me suggest this by Simranjeet Singh, and it's called The Light We Give, How Sick Wisdom Can Transform Your Life. In this, Simranjeet Singh is a scholar of religion. He's the executive director for the Aspen Institute of Religion and Society program. He was one of the Time magazine's 16 people fighting for a more equal America in 2020, and he's a practicing Sikh. Having experienced marginalization, I should also say he's a Texan, so there's that. Having experienced marginalization for his religious practice, especially wearing a turban, he shares his story with practical insight for rising above divisiveness and cultivating compassion. In his book, he explores 6 Sikh values of oneness. And in it, he puts emphasis on actions that are integral to faith. And much of his transforming insight emerges through his personal and public responses to the oak Creek Massacre, which happened in 2012, you may remember, when a white nationalist attacked the Wisconsin Sikh community and killed 6 and wounded 4. He interviewed members of that community following the shooting, and their responses compelled him to dig deeper into aspects of his faith, especially the term Ik Oankar. And according to him, Ik Oankar means radical connectedness in which everything and everyone is bound together by a single force. Listening deeply to those stories, he realized that if he too valued Ik Oankar as that community did, that his level of implementing that idea had been limited before. He had work to do. And so when he reflected on the practice, he explained, we can believe anything. And note to self, we can preach anything. But what truly shapes our character is what we practice, he said. So he began a daily practice of gratitude in order to cultivate tangible acknowledgement of the idea that everything is divine. We all know true happiness comes from within, he writes. What we may not realize, though, is that it doesn't come on its own. We create joy by making it a daily, intentional practice. So in his wonderfully insightful book, he also notes the power of deep connection that comes from understanding the difference between tolerism and pluralism. He writes, when tolerance is our goal, we prevent ourselves from releasing something far more powerful. A model of pluralism that sees our differences as beautiful and does not feel threatened by them. Until and unless we are able to embrace such a model, he says, we'll remain unable to tap into the richness of our humanity. So, like the bird in our story today, we might be poised in a place unsure of where to fly next, not sure how to get out of the pickle we may be in, or maybe we're just hoping to go a little deeper, find that extra enchantment with life that sometimes can grow dull. As we wait, let's listen for the clap that will launch us in a new direction, one of freedom and liberation. And I think we will discover the glad surprise when we hear the clap that is not really a solitary sound, but instead is the resonating thrum of a collective we. The wisdom of both and, the truth of the unifying unity of opposites, the paradox of pluralism. This is the window that leads to liberation for all of us, today and every day ahead. Amen.
Thank you, Kendra.